It's week 15 of 2018, and today on the Technado, we're going to look at the news, but we're also going to bring in Wes Bryan, who's going to explain all the details behind the new Intel chip announcements with Coffee Lake and what that means for us, and if we should go out and buy the new i9 chips. That's all coming up on the Technado, starting right now. Hello and welcome to the Technado. I am your host, Peter Van Rysdam, and I am joined, as always, by Don Pizzette. Don, how you doing today?
I am here and excited to talk about the tech news, although we've got a little bit of a light schedule for today's episode, right?
Yeah, we have, we're going to be doing the news about half of the episode here, and then we have another mic here behind me because we're going to be bringing in Wes Bryan, who is going to explain all about the new, their Intel chips, right? Just Intel? Or
The Intel i9s, we teased them a little bit last week, and we've got Wes who's going to come in and bail us out so we don't have to make up technical
they're like
specifications.
Coffee something, isn't it? Some weird name.
Something Metal 8.
Yeah, so no one knows what's going on. So, but Wes does, and so he's going to explain what chips are, and well, probably a little deeper than that. We'll go into why this chip is a good chip. But first, we want to talk about the news, and the big news this week is Mark Zuckerberg and Congress, and we're not just talking about the fact that that he had a booster seat to sit on, apparently, which is really all that Twitter took away from this. But found an article with a few takeaways here that are kind of some of the big things. My biggest takeaway, Don, I don't know how much of it you watch, but my biggest takeaway is, number one, that congressmen and women have no idea what Facebook is or the internet in general. And two, they have 4 minutes, and they're going to use it to ask questions, and they don't want to hear your answer because they have more questions to ask.
Yeah, their question is their statement. I watched a little bit of it. I did not watch the whole thing because, honestly, it was just awkward and weird, and he wasn't under oath. The whole thing had no consequences, so it really was just a big show, a performance show for both of them, for the congressmen and women as well as for Mark Zuckerberg, who I don't understand why we waste our time. Like, why the government wastes their time doing it, why we as a people waste our time watching it. I don't know. I guess it's reality TV?
Pretty much, it's actual reality TV as opposed to the staged stuff over on Bravo. But some of the key takeaways that they had in this article on The Verge that we've got here on MSN, some representatives think Facebook violated its consent decree with the Federal Trade Commission, which I know that's something that came up time and time again, and Mark's response was, I don't believe that is the case. And there was just a lot of questions about how Facebook is going to move forward handling this data and how long some of this investigation will take. Because it sounds like they're still doing some investigation into what other companies might actually have information on you. Another interesting thing here is that Zuckerberg was among the people who had his records taken. And I don't know if you've had a chance to look yet. Well, you probably weren't one of the people taken because you have to interact with people on Facebook in order to
not my problem
to do that. I think it's either you took that quiz that was the original one that this started with, or one of your friends took the quiz. Because if they took that, then their friends' information is available as well. But I was not, so I was pretty excited about that. So all my meals over the last several years are still private.
So I haven't looked. They released a tool that lets you test this?
Yeah, you can go on Facebook, and there's a page that basically just tells you whether or not you are. Let me.
Now I'm curious.
I can find that here.
So you make a really good point. Like for me, I don't interact with people on Facebook. I accept friend invites, and then I never log in again. I certainly don't install any apps or games because I don't log in. So there's no point in having an app. But because I accept darn near every friend request that I get. That means that any number of those people, total strangers that I've just said, yeah, I'll be friends with you, whatever. That those people may have taken the test, and so my lack of data might have been shared. So I'd be curious to see that. I didn't know they released a tool.
All right.
I like to think that all of the communications I've had with Vladimir Putin have just been my own spontaneous thing.
Well, I've put that in our podcast chat there, so you can bring that up. And while you do that, let me see what else we've got here. Yeah, it seemed regardless of Democrat or Republican, no one understood what the internet is or how that works. It's
a series of tubes.
Well, yeah, I saw a fun one where they were talking about like the difference with an ISP and like you're wasting your 4 minutes on this when we could be asking real questions. Not that you're right. Not that there's any substance that's going to come out of something that is not necessarily under oath or anything. So did you get that link there?
Not yet.
Okay.
Yeah, I'm slow to
John's information.
I'm slow to do anything. This is what happens when you involve me in
go.
social media. Here we go. All right, so I'm pulling the page up now. Let me get this resized. The biggest challenge for me is just getting logged in. But all right, so I'm logged in. How can I tell if my information was shared with Cambridge Analytica? And
it's right there in the box. There was my information shared based on our records. Neither you nor your friends logged into This Is Your Digital Life, which is the app that was used to get that information. So you're all set. And
I special.
And so so I've seen other people where it says in that box, one of your friends accessed this, so therefore you are part of the data. Or I haven't seen anyone that actually took that quiz, but if you did, you would show up there. I think there were only like 18,000 people that used it, but the friends of friends functionality is what allowed people to get their information out there. So yeah, big takeaway is that really there's no big takeaways, and it's going to be several months, I think, while this continues to shake out and we see really the depth of it and what steps Facebook and other social networks are going to take from here.
Yeah.
All right. Next up in security patches and fun news like that, we've got something from Microsoft, and this is on ZDNet. Windows security, Microsoft patch for Outlook password leak bug, not a full fix. So there's apparently a way that people could see behind the hashes and see what you were typing in?
So basically what happens is when you get an email in Outlook, or really in anything, there's a couple of different formats. So it can be plain text email, which is the safest, but it doesn't look pretty, so people don't like it. There's HTML-based email, which is the most dangerous. It looks really pretty, but it can carry malicious payload. There's this in-between format, which is RTF, rich text format. That's like a good mix between safety and pretty, and so there's many, many email clients out there that default to it. But what some security researchers found was that if you crafted an email that was RTF-based and it had links to files that were on external web servers, Outlook applied a certain security profile to that. So when you clicked on the link, it would strip out any like security tokens or credentials that you had, and it would basically be like anonymous browsing to that link. Safe. Well, they found that those same protections did not extend to SMB servers, server message block. So in the Windows world, if you browse like to a local server, instead of using a fully qualified DNS domain name, you might use a / server name, that type of thing. And when you would browse to a resource that way, that it would include your security token or a hashed version of your password along with the connection string. So it could say, hey, I'm trying to access this file and I'm already logged in. This is who I am, right? Now, technically that's hashed, it's secured, so it's not that big of a risk. But the security researcher said, look, you should really be applying the same level of protection to these SMB servers, because I could craft a malicious link that pointed to an SMB server that was out on the internet. And now you'd be sending these credentials out onto the internet. So that was the flaw. Microsoft stepped in and put in a patch. And what the researchers are saying is, hey, we looked at it, and there's still actually ways that we can take advantage of this. Now, I'll be honest with everybody. I don't think this one's that big of a deal. And the main reason is, it's not a good idea to send your credentials to a server that you've never connected to, even if it's hashed and secured, because eventually they may find some way to reverse it, replay it, whatever. But the other thing here is SMB traffic should really never be passing over the internet. SMB is designed for local traffic. And I've been a big supporter for years of people configuring outbound rules on their firewall. A lot of firewalls have tons of rules for incoming traffic. Will only allow very certain things to come in, but they allow everything to go out. And that's why a lot of these viruses and worms and Trojans are able to spread so fast, because the machine gets infected and it can send whatever traffic it wants out. It starts spamming the internet. But if we configured our firewalls to say, look, yeah, we want to allow people to go out and browse the web and send email. We don't want them to use SMB to reach out to the internet. To internal machines, it's fine, but the internet, no. If you had a block like that put on your firewall, it wouldn't matter if this was secure or not. You would never be vulnerable to it. Like that, it's so easy to fix this. And that's the way that Microsoft's looking at it. They haven't really rushed a big fix out for it. But in the ultra-sensitive security news industry, this is a flaw that hasn't been fully patched, and it makes for good news.
Now, if we can clarify for the lowest common tech denominator, which is me, are we talking about emails that are, Peter@outlook.com, or this is people using Microsoft Outlook, the program on their computer?
Microsoft Outlook, the program.
Okay.
Yep. So if you're
What about
actually
web
running
access, though?
OWA is not affected by
Okay.
this. Yep. Yeah, because at that point you're just in the web browser.
Okay.
Yep. So this would have to be somebody running Outlook. And now that you mention it, I didn't think of this until just now, which is somewhat embarrassing. I didn't look to see if this affects Outlook on Mac as well, or if it's just the Windows-based Outlook. This article is a little
PC
light on the details. Let's pull up the CV.
PC, but
Because it could also be in a specific version, but I imagine it'll be the same across them all. Oh, great. I have to accept some random licensing agreement to be able to look at. This isn't even the stinking CVE. See, this is frustrating.
there you go, Flash player.
Yeah, perfect. It's this is why it's so hard to get legitimate information on some things. But with this one, I think that a lot of people have moved away from using the Outlook client. Do you use the Outlook client?
It's funny. I have both the Outlook client opened and the web version, because I use the web version when I want to search, and I just have the Outlook open for the calendar, because I find that's a lot easier to use that way. But
Yeah.
for the actual mail, I do that in the web.
I use Outlook Web Access,
Yeah.
and I have a few reasons for that, but the main one is that the search functionality in Outlook is terrible.
It's so bad.
The search functionality in OWA is mediocre, and I'd rather take mediocre than terrible. I wish it had the search functionality of Gmail, which is really the best.
Yeah.
But that means...
Which, isn't that what you do as well? Don't you have a,
Yeah,
a
I
little
do.
workaround?
So technically, I've got like Google indexing my email. So we talk about Facebook having access to our data. Google has every email I've ever sent. So that's a bigger concern. Well, I mean, I guess they're not. At least they're not changing out emails to look like they're from Vladimir Putin. But yeah, it's this kind of stuff. I think that for most people, this is a non-starter. The Outlook client is not terribly popular anymore. Email clients in general are not terribly popular because they still rely on IMAP or require licensing for Exchange. A lot of people aren't using Exchange anymore. So this is certainly lower on the risk factor. But it is a real risk, and it does give me a chance to highlight my own agenda, which is if people used outbound firewall rules on their firewalls, the world would be a safer place. You'd have a lot less of these attacks, and you'd be much better protected.
Well, this is why I only use Microsoft Outlook Express.
Oh, there you go.
Still, yeah, definitely the way to go there. All right, well, let's continue with the breaches and the potential flaws here. This one caught my eye. It's the Great Western Railway accounts were breached, and this is a British rail operator. And the reason it caught my eye is I said, aren't we at GDPR time? Is this the first one? And no, we've still got some time. I think it's May 25th is when the GDPR rules take effect. But I was saying to Don, this seems like the time to, if you've got any concerns about breaches, announce them now, because it's going to be a lot cheaper for you before the 25th.
So it reminds me of like when interest rates go up on mortgages. Like, if you're going to buy a home, you need to secure your financing now. You need to lock in that rate because the interest rates are about to go up. Well, the fees for a data breach are about to go up. So if you've got one, disclose away. This one's a bit of a gray area, though, right? Because, like, the UK is not. Where are we at with Brexit, right? Like, so are they?
I don't think that's
covered?
done. Yeah, I mean they're negotiating Brexit, but I think they're
still an EU
part of the
member,
EU. I
so
believe so.
they would have a bigger risk here certainly than we would. Obviously you need to responsibly disclose your breach, but part of GDPR has a rule that says if there's been a data breach, you have to notify affected customers within 3 days. 3 days, that's really short. So if you've been sitting on one for a month, first off, shame on you. Second off, get it out there now. That way you don't get hit after, is it May 25th? I don't think the article says, but these guys, they actually disclosed pretty quick. They haven't disclosed any information about how the compromise happened yet, so I'm curious to see on that one. But it's just one more in the long list of data breaches that we've seen just constantly for the last 6 months.
So according to the National Law Review, the official end of UK's membership in the EU will take place on 29 March 2019.
All right.
And you can tell
It's a
this
way
is
off.
a European site because they put the day before the month. So 29 March. And then it also goes on to say that no GDPR will still apply in the UK on and from 25th May 2018. They'll still be a member state of the European Union at that point. So I don't know what will happen
Yeah.
after that other date, if they'll choose to have something similar to GDPR for themselves or not. But
Well, they'll still be held to a good bit of the same way we are, right? You know, if you have
Yeah.
customers or do business in these other countries that are a part of the EU, then you know that's how it's going to be. So they'll have all that. It'll still apply.
yeah, and I think this next one is our last great breach story for this week. But it's kind of an interesting one, especially after what happened in Hawaii earlier this year with some emergency response systems. But the emergency broadcast system hack shows the need for encrypted wireless communication. This from Tech Republic. Apparently, emergency sirens sold by a specific company, Acoustic Technology, use an unencrypted command and control system broadcast over the air, which allows hackers to commandeer them. And the cool thing, I think, is that I was telling Don, they can play anything they want over the speakers, which that's pretty fun.
Yeah, so you wake up to these giant speakers blaring Britney Spears across the city.
That's less fun.
You know, they referenced it was last year that was it Houston, Austin. It was a city in Texas, somewhere here in the article, where hackers managed to capture the signal that activated the test for the speakers, and there it was like the air raid siren that they play when hurricanes happen, or I guess an air raid. And they were able to replay that signal. And so they were setting off those sirens multiple times over the course of a day or two, which scared a lot of people at first. But then towards the end, it made people ignore the sirens, which now you don't have a good way to alert the public to a disaster and emergency. That's a big deal. So our emergency systems are really, really important. And in the U.S., there's a ton of laws that are designed to help make sure that we don't get desensitized, right? So, for example, the emergency broadcast system, there's that screeching noise they use whenever there's an announcement that's going to be happening. And then I've become somewhat desensitized because what do they immediately say? You know, this was a test, blah, blah, blah. And they test a little too often. And sometimes they test in the middle of the night, but a lot of times they test right in the day, and you just get used to it. It's actually illegal for anyone to rebroadcast that sound outside of an actual emergency broadcast system test. So, like if we were to play that sound here on the podcast, we'd get in trouble. The FCC or whoever would come after us. There was I think it was like an Independence Day commercial that aired with the sound, and they got a huge fine as a result. So here, these emergency speakers are using an unencrypted wireless communication. So with off-the-shelf parts, you could intercept those communications and see how they were talking. If you just captured one test, you'd be able to figure out how the test worked and then send whatever you wanted. So there are a ton of SCADA systems, like industrial control systems, that are like this, that the people that developed it are engineers, people that are really good in one particular area, and now they're trying to shoehorn network connectivity into their devices, and they're doing it in a non-secure manner. So this is the whole IoT thing all over again. Companies just have to do a better job securing their equipment.
Yeah, and it's just like Bluetooth now, where you can just pair your phone with the speaker outside of your house and just go to town. That sounds like a lot of fun. And it was Dallas, last year that had an incident. It says that one was built by Federal Signal. So I guess that's a different company than the one that this one's talking about, but still the same kind of issue there. So you mentioned the FCC. This is the FTC. The FTC staff warns companies that it is illegal to condition warranty coverage on the use of specified parts or services, which that sounds like a pretty big deal, because that's what you hear all the time about. If you pop something open and use some third-party component, you've voided all warranties.
Yep, there's several companies these days that are doing this, and it's really annoying. So, for example, maybe you've got an HP laptop, and you take the memory out and you put in third-party memory to do an upgrade, right? Well, in the past, they would warn you, like, if you use third-party hardware in this laptop, you voided the warranty, you're out of luck. And so it would discourage people from doing that, and you'd buy official memory. But the reality is that's illegal. They're not allowed to do that. And there's a few companies that have been creating warranty statements or advertising that got the FTC fired up enough that they actually sent out some warnings. So it says 6 major companies, and As far as I can tell, they haven't announced who those companies were. So when they say major companies, we don't necessarily know what that means. But they've notified them saying, hey, what you're advertising, that's not allowed. And they're reminding us as consumers and businesses that when you purchase something and it has a warranty, whoever assigns that warranty has to honor it. And there's no simple out. And my favorite one, they specifically mention in here 3 different statements that companies make that are invalid, right? And one of them is the use of whatever their company is, the use of our parts is required to keep your manufacturer's warranties and any extended warranties intact. You hear that from a lot of automakers. You've got to use our official parts when in reality they're not allowed to do that. This warranty should not apply if this product is used with products not sold or licensed by insert company name. So, now holding it down, like Apple with their MFi controllers and speakers and things like these are made for iPhone, but you can use anybody's device. It doesn't have to be an MFi device, and it won't void your warranty. But this is the best one here. The warranty does not apply if this product has had the warranty seal on the product altered, defaced, or removed. We've all seen those stickers on a computer, usually over like a screw or over a seam that says, warranty void if sticker removed. Well, it's not. That warranty is not void if the sticker's removed. You can remove it all you want, and you can leave void written all over it, and they still have to honor the warranty.
And it sounds like this isn't new. It's just they're telling them, hey, what you were doing is against the rules. So that's just been a scare tactic this whole time, it kind of sounds like.
Yes. So the law was actually passed a long time ago, and the problem is it's written in legalese, right? So average citizens can't read it, or without learning Latin. And then these companies, they're choosing to ignore it and make it sound like your warranty is void when it isn't. And so this is the FTC coming out and saying, look, let's put this in plain English for a second. Here's these things that companies are saying. You're not allowed to say that. And so it's consumer protection. It's good to see it happening, and it's all stuff that helps protect us. The original act that all this stuff comes from is the Magnuson-Moss Warranty Act, and I wonder if I can find out what year that was released. Let's see, about 1975.
Wow.
So a long time ago, and maybe there was an interpretation that had to be done or something, but now they're just trying to clarify and get it where everybody's on the same page and understand what your rights are with hardware. That's really important because a lot of computer systems and things that we buy these days, if you want to upgrade them or replace a part, you're going to have to open it and you're going to have to break some kind of warranty seal. The warranty seals don't matter. They're not real.
I'm going to go home and crack open all my routers and cable boxes and everything tonight. This is exciting.
Yeah, who knows what's inside?
Yeah, I'm going
all the NSA listening devices.
I'm going to rip the tags off the mattresses too. This is a big night. All right, let's switch gears now to some open source stuff. Head over to Phoronix, where they tell us that Red Hat confirms, is that RHEL or RHEL? I don't know how things work. These RHEL, sure. RHEL. RHEL 8 will drop Python 2. So obviously, Don, I don't know anything about this, so I'm going to let you take this one.
All right. So Red Hat Enterprise Linux, if you're a Linux user, if you've used Red Hat, or me, I'm a big supporter of Red Hat. As far as commercial Linux distributions go, Red Hat is the market leader in that. They have a very stable Linux platform, and they've been on Red Hat 7 for years now. And everybody's been wondering, when is Red Hat 8 going to drop? It feels like it's coming soon. And it is. We're getting closer and closer. But one of the things that's kind of setting a timeline on this is this battle over Python. Now, Ronnie Wong, one of the edutainers over at ITProTV, he has been learning Linux, and I've been working with him a bit. And he's watched some of the areas where I get frustrated with Linux, where I've been a Linux user for 20 years now. And Python is one of my frustration points. Red Hat has always focused on making a stable version of Linux, stable and commercially supported, right? So for servers, for businesses, not for people playing video games. And they do that by not updating to the latest and greatest software right away. They wait until it's stable, the fixes are in, and so on. Well, Python 2 was supposed to end of life in 2015. And so many people hadn't upgraded their scripts and other things to Python 3 yet that when 2015 hit, they decided to extend the end of life for it to the year 2020, right? So we're in 2018, 2 more years of Python 2 support. But that's it. They're not extending it anymore. At the end of 2020, Python 2 is going away. Well, today, if you install the latest version of Red Hat Enterprise Linux, it still defaults to Python 2. And it's super annoying because every time I do some kind of a deployment, I've got to upgrade it to Python 3, and it's a whole mess. So they've been really kind of dodgy on giving solid information on when Python 3 was going to be stable. And in the release notes for Red Hat Enterprise Linux 7.5 that just came out, they said Python 2 is now a deprecated feature, which means it will not make the jump to Red Hat Enterprise Linux version 8. So when version 8 comes out, you'll have Python 3, and that's it, and I'll be thankful for it. Now, they still haven't set a date for Python 3, or for RHEL 8, but this is what's telling us that it's coming soon, at least by 2020. So now we know that by 2020, RHEL 8 will be out. Realistically, it'll be next year, 2019. We'll probably see beta start to drop later this year, and RHEL 8 come out afterwards. But if you've got scripts and other things that are dependent on Python 2, 2020 is the end of life on it, and so that's stuff that needs to be updated and ported over. Things are different in Python 3. There's some functionality that just does not work the same, and you've got to make sure that you've got that kind of support. RHEL 7.5, what actually just came out, where all these announcements are coming from, has a couple of neat features in it, most of which I think a lot of our listeners probably wouldn't care about. But one interesting one, let me pull up the release notes here. I've got the official release notes from Red Hat. One interesting thing that popped up is in the architectures section of the release notes, because when I first glanced at it, I could have swore it said they were moving to kernel 4.14. I said how they maintain stability by using older software that hasn't necessarily been updated to the latest version because they want stability. Well, if you were running RHEL 7.4, it's running the Linux kernel 3.10. which is pretty old, right? But it's extremely stable. It's pretty old. And so they mentioned in the release notes right here that RHEL 7.5 is distributed with kernel alt packages, which include kernel version 4.14. I saw that and I was like, well, that's a huge change for a minor, from going 7.4 to 7.5. But it turns out that that's not for the regular Intel AMD processors. That's because 7.5 was the first one to have 64-bit ARM support. So you can actually deploy on an ARM processor. And this is Red Hat getting ready for ARM processor-based servers starting to take over data centers. We're seeing more and more of that. So RHEL will be ready for it. But if you do, you'll actually be running kernel 4.14, which is a pretty big jump. And so now I'm really curious when we get RHEL 8, whether they're going to jump up to 4.14 also, which would be great for better system D support and hardware support and a number of other things.
What's the latest kernel that we're at now? Because I know we just had a discussion about
4.16.
16. Okay,
yep.
And that was the one that takes care of all the meltdown Spectre.
Yep, and what Red Hat does is they might be running something old like 3.10, but they take those Spectre and Meltdown and all those other updates, and they do what's called backporting.
Okay.
And so they bring them back so their kernel is heavily patched, but it's still old. There's a lot of stuff that doesn't quite... there's a lot of features that we expect, especially with like Docker and container systems, that might not be present in those older kernels. So getting a newer kernel is always a big deal.
Gotcha. Well, I know we talked a couple of weeks ago about Apple kind of making that move to 64-bit apps. You were just talking about 64-bit there. Well, Apple has now begun notifying macOS users. So they've notified the developers a while ago that they're going to be making this move, but now they're letting you know as an end user that, hey, this app you're using needs to be updated, or in some cases, it sounds like it's even saying this needs to be updated by the manufacturer. So maybe if they haven't made the updates yet, it's, I guess, kind of calling you out a little bit to the end user that you're not up to date.
Well, what they're trying to communicate, and this is with High Sierra 10.13.4. So if you've done the latest update as an end user, you'll now start to see these messages on 32-bit apps. And what they're telling you is, hey, when the next version of macOS comes out, we're not going to support this app. So unless the developer releases an update or unless you apply that update, this program is no longer going to work when you upgrade. This is kind of Apple throwing down that gauntlet and saying, that's it. We've set a line in the sand, and this is what's going to happen. For most people, like for me, all of my apps already had 64-bit versions in place, so I don't have a single app that's affected by this. But I'm not the usual. I think that most people have at least one or two apps, and I liken it to iOS. When this happened on iOS, I had an iPhone 1, the first generation iPhone, and I bought a number of apps, and I was always surprised 5 years later, you'd be on an iPhone 4 or iPhone 5, and there were all these apps that you used to have. And then by the time I got an iPhone 6, a lot of those apps went away. And what happened was the developers hadn't been updating them. And in fact, in 2017, it's the first time that Apple ended the year with less apps than the App Store than they started with, because they culled out a bunch of apps that were no longer being updated. That's basically what's happening here inside of macOS as well. And it's all getting ready for Apple to start offering the iOS apps running on top of macOS. So that's all coming probably in the next 6 months, because WWDC is coming up.
Yeah, and I think all of this is really a PR move, essentially, where they're saying, hey, this is the developers, because otherwise what's going to happen is everyone's going to say, Apple broke all my stuff, and it's not working anymore, but Apple is letting you know ahead of time, every time you open that app, that this is on the developer to make those changes. So that's probably why you're seeing a lot of those messages. All right, let's move now over to Amazon AWS. We've got a couple of, what are these, new releases, basically?
Yeah, a couple of new features rolled out, and some of these actually launched right as we were filming our show last week, so they're 7 days old or so. But I thought they were important enough that I wanted to mention them here on the show. Two big announcements that came out of Amazon, and this is just part of their routine feature announcement. There wasn't like a giant conference or anything around this one. One is they released a new utility called the AWS Firewall Manager. So in AWS, you now have the WAF, or Web Application Firewall service, and you've got a couple of other little pieces they've been releasing that are all based around security, like AWS Shield and a few other things. So the AWS Firewall Manager is designed to unify all of that security into one panel for you to log in and manage this stuff. So if you have, let's say you're a contractor and you have more than one AWS account that you manage, or you're just an individual, but you've got systems deployed in multiple regions, it's difficult to manage them all at once. And if I have a WAF rule that I want to put in place and apply to 8 different regions, in the past I had to connect to each region individually and apply that rule. Well, now you can use the AWS Firewall Manager. It lets you see it all in one place, and you can have at it. So that tool has been launched on AWS. Great utility there. I've messed around with it just a hair, and from what I've seen so far, it's pretty cool. I'll get a chance to work with it more a little bit later in the week. But it's another new feature. Amazon's always trying to add more things. They also added another Amazon S3 storage tier. So with S3, you have multiple storage tiers, and some are more expensive than others. Like if you want the multi-availability zone storage, or the geo-dispersed storage in S3, they charge extra for that. Or if you do Glacier storage, that's the cheapest because it's offline. You can't get at it for 5 hours and that kind of stuff. So they released a new tier, which is called a Single Zone Availability Infrequent Access, or IA tier. So this is where you have data that you don't access very often, that you also have another copy of somewhere else, and so you don't need Amazon to maintain availability on it. And so you can throw it up in there and actually get it much, much cheaper. And this is perfect for backup storage. If you're backing something up, well, you've got your production copy of it, right? And if your production copy fails, you need the backup. But most of the time, you don't need the backup. So having that backup replicated into a bunch of different AZs isn't really necessary. So you might want to copy in another region. That's a different story. But multiple AZs may be overkill. So you can go to this lower tier of storage and actually save some money, which means you can maintain more backups than normal because they cost less. So it's kind of a win for us. And it basically would shave off 20% of the cost by cutting down the redundancy. So instead of that S3 bucket being stored in 3 places, which is the default, it would only be stored in 2, and those 2 places would both be in the same availability zone. So if the AZ went down, you don't lose your data, you just lose access to the data until the AZ comes back up, and then you get it again, right? If you wanted to be protected in case an AZ went down, then you'd actually have to go do the normal tier. But for most people, for backup data, it would be perfectly fine, and you could shave 20% right off of your storage costs.
All right. Thank you for explaining that, Don. Now, our last story of the day, and remember, don't go anywhere. We've got an interview coming up after this. This is kind of our head-scratcher WTF story. So every year, it seems like somebody makes some mistakes with April Fools, where Whether it's just some bad PR, just a joke that is a little too off color. This one, well, what is today? Today's the 12th, April 12th, that we're filming this, and we're still talking about April Fools, and that's kind of part of the problem with this one. So, Don, you were telling me the story. Why don't you share that with us?
So, a couple of weeks ago, Google made an announcement that if you were running the Google Apps Suite on a Android phone that was not an authorized Android phone, it would stop you from installing it. And so the modding community, people that created custom firmware, were kind of annoyed with that. The biggest custom firmware that's out there is Lineage OS. And the Lineage OS team decided they were going to do an April Fool's joke to spoof what Google was doing. The problem was, while they created it and they put out release notes on April 1st, it didn't actually get pushed out until much later. And so it was like April 9th, April 10th before most people started to get this as part of a nightly update. And when you'd fire it up, what it did, and this is coming from Android Police, and they've got some screenshots of it, it would do a system notification saying, validation error, you might be a victim of software counterfeiting. Tap to discover more about this, right? So Lineage OS was telling you that you might have counterfeit software. And when you tapped on it, you got this other warning that was the Lineage Genuine warning, right? Saying this device is uncertified and it didn't pass the validation. And that's what Google is saying with their Google Apps Suite for Android. In order to avoid malicious usage of the device's resources, lost coins will be mined on this device. Lost is Lineage OS. So they're basically saying, you're not on authorized hardware, so we're going to mine a cryptocurrency on your device. Now, there's a few areas here where this is bad. So one, it wasn't on April Fool's, and so most people thought it was a legitimate warning. Two, mining Bitcoin or any kind of cryptocurrency from a mobile device is a terrible idea because they don't dissipate heat very well. And so they can melt down if their CPUs run at full speed for too long, which is exactly what a cryptocurrency miner would do. And then three, they're not really giving you much of a choice here. They're just saying they're going to do it, which is another thing that's going to really tick people off because it'll run your battery down and all that. They didn't actually mine the coins. It was just a joke. But they didn't do a good way of communicating that. And it's just a bad joke. They ended up releasing an apology. But, April Fool's is fun. But I get kind of annoyed when the companies all start to do it. Slashdot. Slashdot is a tech news website. I've gone to them since they opened, way back in, I don't know, the late 90s. And every April Fool's, they would do a whole day of just April Fool's jokes for the news that day. And it was terrible. I wouldn't even bother going to the site because they had no news. It was all fake. It was fake news. They were predicting. Yeah. Who knew?
Ahead of their time.
Now we know who to blame. Yeah. So anyhow, I get frustrated when companies do it because it's not funny. And except for ThinkGeek. When ThinkGeek does it, they always turn it into a real product.
ThinkGeek got me once because they had a tattoo that you could it used e-ink, and so you could change your tattoo from day to day. I was like, it's pretty cool. I'm interested in that. And then it was an April Fool's joke, and I was disappointed.
They had the swim desk. That was pretty cool.
I didn't see that.
They had like a pool attached to it. You swim while you're working.
That's good.
But the big example from them though was the Tauntaun sleeping bag. Where instead of a zipper, it was like a little lightsaber, and you'd open up and climb inside.
Where it's a real thing now. Yeah.
It's a real thing now. Yeah. Apparently, George Lucas thought it was funny, and they licensed it, and now they sell it.
Well, on the flip side of Slashdot, I think The Onion reports all real news on April Fool's, so it makes up for it. So just head over there and trust everything that you read on April 1st there. But maybe I was pleased that April 1st was on I think a Sunday this year because it meant that we didn't have to try to think of something here at ITProTV, and so so next year maybe we'll remember this and not get involved with that. But all right, we're going to shift gears now and get to our interview. We're going to talk all about Intel chips with Wes Bryan, who will be right here. So maybe let's do like the genie thing, and we'll come back and Wes will be here.
Tap your head.
Yeah, so let's do that.
So wavy line
on this shot, and here's Wes.
Well, hello.
It worked. We have Wes Bryan here. Wes, welcome to the Technado.
Hey, thanks for having me, guys. It's fun to be here. Glad to be here.
Well, we understand that you are an expert on all things chips, and so
free to lay, yeah.
Yeah. Well, speaking of food, I read this and said, all right, so Intel's getting into coffee now.
Yes, absolutely.
So coffee like that, that's a code name?
It is. It's like most of the Intel line. They have a code name for them, and then once they release the processor, it's kind of like Prince. It's the the processor line formerly known as Coffee Lake. So yeah, that is the latest and greatest.
Okay, so the official release name on these is this i9?
i9 series, yeah,
okay.
absolutely. Yeah, it's part of the new iCore X series that they have too. The i9 just happens to be the biggest and the baddest of the bunch for sure.
All right, so what makes these processors better than the previous? What was the previous one? I've got a chart here that kind of outlines all the order that all these chips have been coming out. So what's the previous one here? The i7, I guess?
It's pretty much been the i7 in mobiles, and really it comes down to it. It's been the i7s and the quad-core processors, and one of the big things about this one is that, well, it's an i9, and Don and I were kind of joking about, well, okay, what did they do? They added two place values or whatever, two numerical values to the letter or the number there. What makes this better? Well, one thing is it's the most powerful processor that they've actually brought to mobile. They've brought that i9 series, which we usually see in high-end workstations rather than laptops.
See, now this is where I started getting confused, and I said, we got to get Wes on the show because I saw that they announced the i9s, and to me, that's a big jump, right? We've had i3, i5, i7 for years and years. All of a sudden, they announced i9s. That's like going from 386 to 486. Isn't it like a huge jump? But I couldn't find out what the hell that meant. And you had we had KB Lake before, which means nothing to me, and then Coffee Lake now, and I don't even know where all these lakes are. And so it was just confusing. But then the fact that it was mobile, you just mentioned desktop. Are these in desktop yet, or is it just mobile so far?
Well, with the one that's out right now, the i9-8950HK that we see there in the top of the list, that is a mobile processor. And again, one of the biggest things and why everybody's like, oh, this is just amazing, is if you think about the X series that they released with the i9s before, these were 18-core processors, around $2,000. So they were very high-end processors. And again, they were kind of their flagship. And they were put in desktops. They weren't put in mobile processors. And like I said before, prior to that, it was i7 quad cores. This brings, a 6-core 12-thread processor to your laptops. And if you go over to things like you can visit the Intel's newsroom, right? They're really focusing it around like the gaming experience, right? Improved frames per second, and things like content creation as well. But there's a few more bells and whistles that they're adding to it.
So, the first thing I did is I said, okay, they've announced this thing that's new. I'll just compare it to the old one, see what's changed, and that'll tell me what's new. So Intel has this nice little comparison tool. I can check off these two processors. Let me do it. So I'm going to check off that i7, and this i7 came out at about the same time. So it should have the latest and greatest features. I checked off the i9. I hit compare, and then I started looking at this list, comparing it. And so see, it's got the i7 on the left, and the i9 is on the right. And as I go down the list, I'm not really seeing anything different beyond price, right? The i9 is almost $200 more, which is a pretty good chunk. But they're both 6 cores. They both are hyper-threaded, so they can do 12 threads. The i9 is at 2.9 gigahertz versus 2.6 gigahertz for the i7, so it's got more bandwidth to it, right? Yep. So that's a difference. But kind of going down the line, I didn't really see anything super different other than like there's more of this or more of that. So to me, I look at it and I say, well, why wouldn't you just call that an i7? Like, why give it this new name? Is that just marketing, or is there some feature that I'm just not seeing in the comparison table?
No, I really think it's just one of those marketing things. Because like you said, looking down through the comparison, there's a little bit more in here, like the graphics max dynamic frequency and stuff, but really not too much more. It's got the Turbo Boost 3.0 technology, which I kind of consider that kind of like core targeting, right? If you have 4 cores and they're maxed at, let's say, 2.9 gigahertz, right? And we're using a workload that maybe only needs a single thread. Well, what they do is they just kind of reduce the voltage in the other cores, and they just put all that voltage into a single core, and it can boost up to about 4.8 gigahertz. So, just an improved chipset, different chipset. As well, I believe this is the 300 series chipset, likewise too. And again, not really too much different. I think it might just be that marketing thing because they were so happy with their i9 18 core. Well, they figured they had to bring a 12 or a 6 core to mobile.
This is the Apple school of marketing, right? That your Apple Watch 1 or 2 might be fine, but the Apple Watch 3, we're going to put a red dot on it. And if people see you don't have that red dot, they'll know you're not running the 3. I just thought it was humorous because as you scan down the list, I've been scrolling, for those of you that are watching the video and not just listening to audio, as you scroll down this list of features, there's a blue line anytime there's a difference. And most of the time, there's something on the i7 that's just either faster or there's a little bit more of it in the i9. But for the whole rest of the document, it's things that are missing in the i9. That the i7 actually had more features that I don't know, maybe they had to make room or cut out. My favorite was vPro because remember, Intel vPro had those security exploits earlier this year, or at the end of last year. And so apparently Intel fixed that by eliminating vPro. Right here, there's no vPro in that i9.
That's a good way to eliminate that problem. Just take it out altogether.
So is this something then that you suggest we look at upgrading to, or is this kind of, hey, this is cool, this is where things are going, but let's wait and see where it goes?
Well, I tell you what, let's bring back up that comparison because it's interesting because as we know, Apple for now, I know that we've probably heard about the rumors that they're going to eventually ditch Intel and they're working on internal models too. So we'll see. But if you focus in on the memory support, right? That's one big thing, and that's obviously going to be implemented a little bit different in Mac than it's going to be in PC, right? Because you see that the chip actually supports 64 gigs of RAM, and it supports the DDR4 2666 RAM. Well, we're never going to see that in a MacBook Pro, even though it does support, and again, there will be support for these i9HKs. We've heard that, they don't really like going with something that's going to draw more power, so they're sticking with the LPDDR3 there that you see, the 2133, and it's going to be 16 gigs. Obviously, it's not going to be even maxed out to 32 gigs, so you see a limiting factor there, just because they talk about the difference between the memory consuming 1.5 volts or watts of energy versus I think it's 3 to 4 watts that the DDR4 does, and they want to save that battery life.
I know that makes a big difference because I've been critical of my MacBook because it's a Pro, but it only has 16 gigs of RAM, which I eat up on a regular basis. But I get over 10 hours of battery life. I have a System 76 laptop that has an i7 and it has 32 gigs of RAM in it, but I get like 3.5 hours of battery life. So that threshold, like once you cross over 16 gigs, or I guess it's not so much the amount, it's going DDR3 to DDR4. That's where the power consumption comes in.
Yeah, it really does. We're talking about, that's one of the things that have really been just, you see for the most part when they come out with new DDR standards, a lot of times you see a reduction in the voltage, but they've gone even farther than that with the LP DDR series, whether it's DDR3 or DDR4 with the low-powered double data rate memory too. So yeah, it's usually about the voltage. Again, 1.5 volts, or I believe watts, if I get this right, 1.5 watts versus around 3 to 4 watts.
So one of the things I used to tell people would ask me for advice, and they'd say, all right, what processor should I get? And I would say, if you're a video gamer, you can consider AMD, but if you do anything else, stay away from AMD. And then on the Intel side, if you're a cheapskate, you get an i3, but they're not very, very efficient. They're not very fast. An i5 is great for most people. It'll give you a multi-core processor. An i7 will get you hyper-threading, which a lot of users will never take advantage of, but if you're a video gamer or an IT professional, you're running little databases or dev environments, you'll actually benefit from that i7. But hyper-threading was the big difference between an i5 and an i7. It looks like I don't have a piece that I can give as advice like that for why would I go for an i7 versus an i9. Is there anything you can think of, or it's just, hey, it's an i9, you'll have a red dot on your watch?
Do you like money?
Yeah.
Then go with the i7.
Well, in the older chips too, like if you look at some of the integrated features too, you had support for the 802.11ac, but it was a 2x mode, so it was under gigabit speeds, and one of the things that the new i9 is going to support is a higher range gigabit Wi-Fi, as well as so you get the two times faster in that standard. I believe it's yeah, you're going to get into the gigabit versus like 867 megabits speed. So that's one of the things that it does. It does increase the gigabit speeds, and again, they're also pushing for things like mobile VR and stuff. But we've yet to see how well that'll work out. And again, it's funny that you talk about AMD and Intel here, but we'll see when this comes out. But they're actually going to be in bed together, which is kind of interesting. And some of the newer Intel chips are going to actually integrate the Radeon Vega graphics, and now we're going to have a CPU that's Intel supported by the graphics and AMD on all in the same chip. So we'll see where that goes.
So to me, it sounds like right now this is not something that I would specifically set out to upgrade to. Like, I've got to have this i9. It's more of an upgrade of opportunity. But in the future, this might be a big difference. That it might be that it's the one that has the Radeon graphics built in, or something of that nature.
Yeah, definitely, because you've seen, and again, for those of you that are watching, you've seen the specs. Thermal design point or power doesn't change. The nanometer or the lithography is the same. So we're getting around the same speeds, and it really just seems like this is more of a marketing thing to say, hey, we've got this i9. Remember the last one that we released? It was 18 cores. Well, now we've got 6 cores, and you can put it in a laptop, and you can take it where you want to go. So the mobility of it. And, of course, it's got the buzzword of gaming and content creation and virtual reality, which apparently the i7 didn't have all that marketing behind, so it must make it better.
Well, yeah, I got to say thank you, Wes, for coming in and explaining to us, because I didn't know what a chip was, and Don didn't know the difference between the i7 and the i9. So I think we've both gone up a degree of magnitude in our knowledge of chips. Anything else we should know about this announcement before we move on?
No, just do what Don and you guys have showed on the here on the podcast. Do your side-by-side comparison before you decide to shell out an extra $500 on your processor, because you might be able to spend that money in other areas and get a lot better, SSDs, if you will, NVRAM and stuff. You might be able to spend that in other areas and get better performance.
And while we've got you here in the studio, let me put you on the spot about something I've just been curious about. Might tie into this, might not. What do you know about TurboMax?
The TurboMax frequent? Okay, well, TurboMax, it's a technology that, I kind of call it core focusing. Intel is helping me focus on my core. Basically, certain workloads, multi-threading workloads, and I know that you've talked about this on the podcast before. Not everything needs a multi or a hyper-threading situation, and sometimes things, applications don't take full advantage of more than one core. So if you have, again, a single thread, basically what it can do is it can use that thermal velocity boost, they call it TVB or whatever, and it dynamically and automatically increases the clock frequency up to the 4.8 gigahertz speeds, and then takes all that power and focuses it either into a single core or maybe even a dual core configuration. Basically, it's just dynamically adjusting where the voltage is. We've seen this throughout Intel's history with voltage positioning technologies and voltage regulation that they're doing. And basically, that's what Turbo Boost is. I consider it kind of like a single extreme single threading, if you will.
So I remember back in the day, right? So I one of my first computers was a 386, I believe it was a 386 DX40, which, if you push the turbo button, it was a 40. If you unpush the turbo button, it was a 33. And then I had a 486 DX266, same thing. If you push the turbo button, you were at 66. So Turbo has been around a long time, but this TurboMax, I'm only recently hearing about that. Is that a new feature with Coffee Lake, or has that been around a little while?
It's been around. I mean, it's in 3.0 right now. They've had 2.0 and obviously 1.0. So it doesn't replace any of the earlier technologies, I would say, as more as it kind of just builds on the past generation, kind of like we see in Wi-Fi standards, right? The Wi-Fi standards that are, have been built into past standards get kind of just rounded up and then added features into the newer standard. Again, it really doesn't change, if you will, some of the earlier Turbo Boost standards. Again, it depends on the things like, the type of the workload. If you have a lightly threaded workload, obviously Turbo Boost is going to be the way to go. If you have a multi-threading application, well, you might not even see really the advantage of the Turbo Boost, because it can, again, dynamically and automatically, I guess, adjust and kind of analyze the workload and what you have going on in the cores, and then automatically adjust to whatever the workload is.
Okay, excellent. So, what I'm thinking is, like, if I'm running a virtual machine and I've got it tied to one virtual processor, then you'd actually benefit from something like that. I don't follow processors as closely as I follow a lot of other technologies, so I hadn't heard much about it. And now I see it in some of these announcements. I'm like, oh, is that a new feature or has that been around? So thank you for shedding some light on that for us.
Definitely.
All right, cool. And thank you, all of you, for joining us here on the Technado. I got to get used to saying that, the Technado. And speaking of which, all of our feeds, our RSS feeds, are updated now to say the Technado. So if you're telling your friends to go and check us out, which we really hope you do, you can let them know to search for Technado on iTunes and Google Play and all those places. And be sure to go there and rank us as well after you share us with your friends. And so I guess that's going to do it for us. Any closing thoughts, Don?
I really don't have any this week. It was not the craziest news week. I'm looking forward to some of the announcements that are about to come up. There's a couple of big company announcements that are coming down the line. So,
well, from our perspective, we've got RSA next week. So I'm going out along with Daniel Lowry, and Titus is on our team as well. And we're going to get, I think we've got 18 interviews lined up.
Wow.
And we'll probably get a couple more as well, or as schedules change. So we'll go ahead and do some recording out there for the podcast here as well, and
awesome.
And bring that back with us. But so that's something exciting to look forward to. And I'll tell you what, I'm excited to get home and rip open all of my my hardware devices now that I know I can just go in there with a hammer and
your
not
warranties will be
void any
fine.
warranties. Yeah, no, this chip was like that. I promise.
I didn't do it.
That's what it looked like. So
Even with the hammer imprint and all, right?
yeah, exactly. Yeah. So enjoy tinkering with your hardware tonight at home, and that came out. That's great.
It really came out
fantastic.
creepy. Yep.
All right, I'm going to go ahead and leave before I say anything else weird. So good night, everyone.